sounds pretty innocuous. And these are two companies that operate a number of prisons with thousands of beds. The GEO Group in particular made a contract with ICE to detain immigrants in their Queens facility in New York City to hold detainees for the U.S. Marshals. This is awaiting deportation. And local news reports in New York City revealed that ICE had been paying $225 a day for each detainee that was placed in the GEO jail. The typical costs for a day of detention are about $38 in most places, $38 to $45. So obviously this is very profitable for these companies. And private prison executives have long relied on immigrant detention to grow their business, if we can speak of it that way. There's one guy, there's another company called the Cornell Companies that is a prison company. And apparently within weeks of the 2001, the 9/11 attacks, the chairman of this company, Cornell Companies, based in Houston, Texas, excitedly told stock analysts that the massive terrorist strike was going to boost his business. Quote, "It is clear that since September 11th, there's a heightened focus on detention. More people are going to get caught. So I would say that's positive. The federal business is the best business for us, and September 11th is increasing that business," close quote. So this is a hot market, right? Detention is a very hot market for these companies. The private prisons are generally, they're publicly traded companies, so their ongoing relationships with ICE have increased the value of these companies, and their stock prices have gone up quite a bit in the last few years. And they typically charge between $90 and $200 a day for housing an immigrant. The local jails have a different, they're not for-profit agencies, so they're typically either county jails or state prisons that make these contracts with the ICE. They're called intergovernment agreements. And these local authorities, whether they be the state correctional authorities or the county jails, use these contracts with the federal government to house detainees in order to finance new jail construction primarily and operating costs of their prisons. And their costs are generally quite a bit lower than the private prisons, but they charge similar rates. So the difference is what the county or the state recoups in order to finance their own prisons, their prison construction and prison operation. So a lot of money is being made in the detention business. And again, as I said, with the agreements that ICE makes now with a lot of local police enforcement authorities and state highway patrols and other law enforcement agencies, there's an unending supply of new bodies feeding this new industry that's resulting in massive profits and massive human rights abuses. I guess I'll stop there, and if people have questions later, we can talk some more.
I was wondering, we have Chris Tinson here. I was wondering if you wanted to add anything to that, or if you want to stick around. Yeah. That was a lot. Or you can stay here for questions after that.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think we're going to do questions after this.
I actually have to precede the detention issue, and my work has been actually with an organization that tries to find people to detain. For the last 4 years, I've been doing participant observation with the Minutemen, and not the ones that are in the valley, but the folks who sit on the border in an attempt to keep undocumented immigrants from crossing. And what motivated me to do this work is because I'm a native Californian, Southern Californian, Mexican-American, but as you can see, I think you can see, who knows what you see, I pretty much pass for a Caucasian American. And a lot of people say a lot of interesting things to me, and have my whole life, about Mexican Americans, or Mexicans in general. So when the Minutemen sort of started taking off, I watched with interest, thinking this is just a silly little fringe group. And then it became very, very well organized. And so my sociological curiosity was piqued. And I decided I was going to capitalize on my skin privilege and become a Minuteman and see what the heck was going on down there. And so what's interesting is now I'm a card-holding Minuteman, because we don't have Minute Women. I'm a card-holding Minuteman, that says a lot, doesn't it? Minuteman in 7 states, including states in which you would rarely find undocumented immigrants, or at least see them as threats in any possible way. But the way in which this, I think what I'm going to talk about folds into Flavio's work is sort of the way in which the militarization of the border has given rise to groups like this in a way that justifies their existence, not just to themselves, but to society at large, in which there's not a great outcry as to what they're doing, or pushback, or even questioning that this is something almost really weird and insane. So, as we've seen with greater and greater rates, but also everything seems to be related to post 9/11. Of course, with the Mexican-American experience, this idea of detention and deportation goes back all the way to the treaty, right? And the ways in which people are interpreted as belonging or not belonging in this country. So what we have found is that after 9/11, it gave people a lot of excuses to draw those boundaries very clearly, and who was considered to be a citizen and who was not considered to be a citizen, and the way in which that was conflated with a racial identity, a linguistic identity, and a regional identity. So we saw increasing molestation of individuals who were not white-looking, who had, you know, unaccented English, and basically had papers at hand at all points. I will say that even that has become more and more problematic, and I'll tell you a little story about that in just a second. But this militarization of the border has escalated to the point in which you do not just have ICE involved, but you now have Homeland Security involved. And when you get Homeland Security involved in anything, a lot of, I'm sure Flavio can tell you, a lot of rules seem to go by the wayside. And a lot of them get made up as we go along. So we have seen in the Minuteman organization participation of high-level talks in the national government of ways in which the Minutemen can, in private, do some of the Border Patrol work. So what happens is on public lands, the Border Patrol fills that area, and then you have private landowners who utilize the Minutemen. But all of this is known to the government. And even though it is, quote unquote, illegal for United States citizens to do this, it's basically turned a blind eye to. And so Minutemen, are people familiar with the Minutemen and how they operate? Well, just in case you don't, we have these really lovely lawn chairs, and we sit half a mile apart in pairs, and the majority of us carry firearms. Of course, mine's not loaded. But for me, as a social observer, it provides authenticity in my project. And those firearms are never to be discharged. There are bylaws and rules under which Minutemen have to agree to. To become a Minuteman, you have to undergo a background check in every single state to which you apply to be a Minuteman. Then you have to go through a training, and then you have to become certified in your firearm with the Minutemen, not just within the state that you live. And it was interesting to me, and we just talked about this very briefly, that when I started the project, the majority of the Minutemen were Caucasian, or Anglos, ranging between young people on the weekends and older people on the weekdays, right? Because the older people were retired, the younger people were what we would call weekend warriors. But as the organization grew in strength and popularity, we saw greater racial diversity, including Mexican-American members, African-American members, very few Asian-American members. But it became
an organization that was holding sway because people like Lou Dobbs were making it very, very